Have you ever felt just, completely swamped by information? Like you're trying to learn something, maybe write a report, understand some complex topic, and you've got articles, videos, AI tools all coming at you.
Oh, absolutely. Information overload.
Right.
It's a real challenge.
Exactly. And you wonder, what if there was a way to shortcut that? To get the important stuff from all those sources, but, without feeling totally overwhelmed.
That's the big hope, isn't it? Navigating this whole modern info landscape, it's tough. And that's actually exactly what we're digging into today.
Perfect way to put it. Because today, we're looking at this really groundbreaking study, 4 months long, 54 university participants. And they weren't just filling out surveys.
No, this was serious tech involved. They used electroencephalography, that's EEG, to literally map brain activity.
Wow.
And natural language processing, NLP, to analyze the actual writing. Plus, they did these really in-depth interviews to, get inside the participants' heads.
So what were they trying to figure out with all that?
Basically, how these different tools, we're talking large language models like ChatGPT, traditional search engines like Google, and even just using your own brain, nothing else, how they fundamentally affect learning, cognitive engagement, memory, specifically when people are writing essays.
Okay, so the big question we're trying to unpack is, how do these tools change not just like the essay you produce, but how your actual brain works?
Oh, yeah.
And, the quality of your learning.
Exactly. We'll explore these surprising differences in neural patterns, this idea of cognitive offloading, and really how our brains adapt when we get help from AI. It's packed with some real aha moments.
I bet. You mentioned neural patterns, cognitive offloading. What else are we going to cover?
Well, you'll learn how brain connectivity actually seems to scale down when you get external help. We'll talk about the Google effect, which is definitely real.
Right.
How your sense of ownership over what you write changes depending on the tool, the subtle impacts on critical thinking, and even something maybe less obvious, the environmental cost of AI.
Okay, that's a lot to cover. So how do they even start measuring something this complex? The setup sounds fascinating in itself.
It really was. So the participants, they were aged 18 to 39, pulled from 5 big universities around Boston, MIT, Wellesley, Harvard, Tufts, Northeastern.
Good mix.
Yeah. And they were randomly put into one of 3 groups.
Okay, group 1.
That was the LLM group. They could only use OpenAI's GPT-4o, no other resources.
Got it. Group 2.
The search engine group, they could use any website, most used Google, naturally, but specifically no LLMs. The researchers were really careful here, even adding AI to search queries to filter out those AI-enhanced answers.
Wow, meticulous.
Very. And then group 3, the brain-only group, they were, forbidden from using any external tools, no LLM, no internet, just their own knowledge.
Just pure brain power.
Pure brain power.
Right.
And everyone wrote essays over 3 or 4 sessions, all while wearing those EEG headsets recording their brain activity.
Okay, so what did they find? What did the essays actually look like?
Well, this was one of the first really striking things. The essays from the LLM group, they showed this striking similarity, almost identical in style, in content.
Really?
Yeah. If you looked at the specific named entities, people, places, dates, definitions, and even the word sequences, very little deviation. Pretty uniform.
That's interesting. And how did that compare to the other groups?
Huge contrast. The brain-only group, their essays showed strong variability, real diversity in how they approached it.
Makes sense.
And the search engine group was somewhere in the middle. Their content seemed influenced, partly by whatever the search engine promoted or optimized.
So like the top results shaped their writing.
Seems like it. And interestingly, on those specific named entities, the LLM group used the most. The search engine group used about half as many. And the brain-only group, about 60% fewer than the LLM folks.
That leads right into this idea of ownership, doesn't it? If the LLM essays were so similar, did the participants feel like they actually wrote them?
That's exactly what the study looked at, and it was fascinating. The LLM group reported really low ownership. I mean, in the first session, some flat out said they had no ownership at all.
Wow, no ownership.
Yeah. It improved a little in later sessions, but it was still a persistent theme for them.
And the other groups?
Totally different story. Get this. For the search engine and brain-only groups, there were 0 reports of feeling no ownership. The search engine group felt strong ownership, maybe a bit less than brain-only, but the brain-only group, most of them claimed full ownership across all the sessions.
So it raises that question. If you don't feel like you own the work, what does that actually mean for your learning, for how engaged you are?
Precisely. And this ties right into memory, which I found one of the most compelling parts. The LLM group really struggled with memory recall.
That's
They
it.
had trouble quoting accurately from essays they had literally just written minutes before. Even later on, some participants just couldn't provide correct quotes.
That sounds like that Google effect people talk about.
It does, very much so. Where you remember where to find the information, maybe the search terms you used, but not the actual information itself.
Hmm.
That same tendency popped up here, not just for the LLM group, but even some search engine users too.
So the big question becomes,
Yeah.
like, if information is too easy to get, does our brain just decide it doesn't need to bother holding on to it? Why would that happen?
That's the core trade-off, isn't it? And to understand the why, we really need to touch on something called cognitive load theory.
Okay, cognitive load theory. Break that down for us.
Sure. Think of cognitive load as the mental effort your brain needs to exert to process information. There are a few types. There's the effort just because the topic itself is hard. That's intrinsic load.
Right.
Then there's effort caused by how the information is presented, like a really confusing diagram or messy text. That's extraneous load. You want to minimize that. But the really important one for learning is germane load. That's the good kind of effort, the mental heavy lifting that actually builds strong memories, deep understanding. It helps you form those crucial mental connections or schemas.
Got it. Intrinsic, extraneous, germane. So how do LLMs fit into this? Do they reduce load, increase it?
This is where it gets really interesting. LLMs are basically designed to streamline information. They often significantly reduce the overall cognitive load, especially that extraneous load, but also the germane load,
Oh,
which makes the task feel, well, effortless, almost frictionless. And we saw that the LLM users in the study were about 60% more productive.
60%. That sounds amazing. More productive, less effort. What's the catch?
Well, there is a catch. While reducing that effort and maybe frustration feels good, it often leads to less deep engagement with the material. Reducing that germane load, the good effort, that's potentially compromising the very process needed to build robust understanding and long-term memory.
So it's easier, but maybe you learn less deeply.
Yeah. Potentially, yeah. It's a shift. You move from active critical reasoning, finding, evaluating, synthesizing information yourself, to more passive oversight. You're just verifying or tweaking what the AI gives you.
Right.
Researchers call this cognitive offloading. Your brain is essentially outsourcing the hard mental work to the AI. It's supervising, not doing the heavy lifting itself.
Okay, so that's the LLM side. How does that compare to just doing a web search?
Well, traditional web searches, they actually place substantial demands on your working memory and attention. Think about it, right? You have to formulate good search terms,
Yeah.
sift through all the results, judge relevance, ignore distractions, navigate websites. It takes real mental effort.
Definitely feels like more work sometimes.
And there's a framework called Search as Learning, or SL, which basically emphasizes that this active engagement, refining your search, critically evaluating sources, making connections, that's what makes web searching a powerful learning tool. You're actively constructing knowledge.
Not just receiving it.
Exactly. Now, engagement is also complex. Some LLMs, especially ones designed to be like a tutor or even an emotional support bot,
Right.
they can actually boost immediate short-term engagement through personalization, maybe even making it feel like a game.
Right, keeping you hooked in the moment.
Yeah, but the concern there is about the sustainability of that engagement and maybe a lack of that deep cognitive engagement. This could mean you end up with less sophisticated reasoning compared to when you really have to wrestle with the ideas yourself.
Okay, so we've seen differences in the essays, in ownership, in memory, in cognitive load. But the really, wow, part of this study for me was looking inside their heads with the EEG. What did the actual brain scan show? The neural fingerprints of learning.
Right. The EEG data was remarkable. It showed distinct neural connectivity patterns, basically how different parts of the brain were talking to each other, reflecting different cognitive strategies for each group.
So let's compare brain only versus the LLM group. What do their brains look like?
The differences were really stark. The brain-only participants, they showed the strongest, most widespread connections across all the different brainwave frequencies. They measured alpha, theta, delta, which are linked to things like attention, memory, and deep processing.
So their brains were basically firing on all cylinders, working harder, connecting more dots.
You could say that. It indicates higher cognitive load, definitely more executive control. The frontal parts of the brain were busy orchestrating everything. Lots of internal brainstorming, pulling up ideas from memory, more bottom-up information flow. The brain generating content from within.
Okay, and the LLM group?
Almost the opposite. They showed the weakest overall neural connections, or coupling, up to 55% reduced connectivity compared to the brain-only group.
55% less. That's huge.
It's a massive difference, and it strongly suggests, well, exactly that cognitive offloading we talked about. Less burden on working memory, fewer executive demands being placed on the brain.
So less effort showing up directly in the brain activity.
Yeah. Less sustained concentration, less arousal needed. And the pattern shifted more top-down connectivity. The frontal cortex seemed to be mostly integrating and filtering the external input from the AI rather than generating things internally. It really implies less engagement in those rich associative processes you get with unassisted creative writing. The brain isn't synchronizing as much to generate ideas from scratch. It's more like it's just receiving and processing.
And how did the brain-only group compare to the search engine users? Was that different again?
It was. Again, brain only showed stronger overall brain connectivity, especially in those slower brain waves, delta and theta, which are often linked to more internalized stuff, episodic memory integrating concepts.
Okay.
The search engine group, they showed sort of intermediate engagement, lower slow wave connectivity than brain only. And this fits really well with that idea of offloading memory demands externally. Their brains were more focused on visual input, top-down attention to the external search results. It's that Google effect showing up in the neural patterns.
Right. Remembering where to look, not necessarily what you found.
Exactly.
But this really reinforces that Google effect. Relying on external memory, whether it's Google or ChatGPT, seems to consistently lead to remembering the location rather than the content. It's like our brains just don't feel the need to encode it as deeply. That's quite profound, isn't it?
It is. And while LLMs definitely reduce that immediate cognitive load, make the task feel easier, this study strongly suggests they might simultaneously diminish critical thinking abilities. Less engagement in those deep analytical processes, vital for real learning.
And you mentioned metacognitive laziness earlier. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so metacognition is basically thinking about your own thinking, planning how you'll learn, monitoring your understanding, regulating your strategies. It's crucial.
Right.
But if the AI generates the content on demand, synthesizes it for you, you kind of bypass that whole crucial process.
Yeah.
You don't get the mental workout needed to build those metacognitive skills, that ability to manage your own learning. It's like outsourcing your thinking about thinking.
And did this play out differently depending on how much someone already knew about the topic, like higher versus lower competence learners?
It did, yeah. The researchers noted that higher competence learners tended to use the LLM more strategically, almost like an advanced tool for active learning. They'd use it to revisit ideas, synthesize information they already had some grasp of, like a super efficient research assistant.
Okay.
But lower competence learners, they often relied more passively on just getting the immediate answer from the AI. They missed out on those back and forth iterative learning processes that really build deep understanding from the ground up.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how the essays were actually judged. Because they didn't just rely on the researchers' analysis, right? They brought in teachers and even an AI judge.
That's right. They had both human teachers and a specially built AI system score the essays on various metrics. And the results here were also pretty surprising.
How so? Were there disagreements?
Big time. The AI judge seemed statistically inclined to score almost everything around a 4 out of 5, kind of clustered towards the high end. Okay.
But the human teachers, on average, they gave lower scores across most metrics, especially for content quality. They often strongly disagreed with the AI judge.
Interesting. Any specific areas?
Well, for structure and organization, the human teachers were pretty consistent, scoring around 3.5 usually. The AI judge showed a much wider range of scores there, and uniqueness was a major point of difference. The AI judge often gave higher uniqueness scores than the human teachers did.
Higher uniqueness scores from the AI. That seems counterintuitive given the homogeneity you mentioned earlier.
It does, right? It makes you wonder what the AI's definition of unique actually is. Maybe just not exactly identical to the last AI essay it saw, versus a human teacher looking for genuine originality of thought.
Good point. Did the linguistic analysis, the NLP stuff, shed any light on this?
It did. They looked at n-grams. Those are just sequences of words, and found really distinct patterns for each group.
Like, for instance, the brain-only group used unique phrases like multiple choice, increased choice, power, uncertainty. You could see a real diversity of ideas coming through in the language.
And the search engine group.
They leaned heavily on terms like homeless person and moral obligation when writing about, say, philanthropy. The study suggested this might be influenced by promoted content or highly optimized articles showing up high in search results.
So the search engine itself might be subtly shaping the language they use.
It's possible, yeah. And the LLM group, they showed a bias towards the word giving in that philanthropy topic, and also a much higher tendency to use third-person phrasing, one might argue, or it is often believed.
Hmm.
It really raises the question, doesn't it? Are these LLMs just echoing biases from their massive training data? Or even picking up on things like search ad keywords and then subtly shaping the language we produce when we use them, even when we think we're being original?
That's a slightly unsettling thought. Now, this study gets even more insightful in session 4, right? Because they had people switch tools.
Yes, session 4 is crucial for understanding the longer-term effects, how these tools might actually change our brains, or at least our cognitive habits, over time.
Okay, so first, what happened with the group that started with the LLM and then had to switch to brain only?
Right, the LLM-to-Brain group. When they had to rely just on themselves, their EEG scans showed reduced neural recruitment for planning and generating content compared to the original brain-only group's later sessions.
Reduced. So even though they were doing the harder task now, their brains weren't working as hard as the people who'd always done it the hard way.
Exactly. Their overall brain connectivity stayed below the levels of those who had practiced unassisted writing. It implies that using the AI beforehand might have actually limited the strengthening of those neural networks needed for self-driven organization and reasoning. Like the brain got a bit less efficient at doing it alone after relying on the shortcut.
Wow. Did their writing reflect that?
It seems so. The linguistic analysis found they often reuse specific phrases like before speaking or perfect society that had appeared in the LLM-generated essays from their earlier sessions.
So like an echo, a bias transfer.
Yeah, exactly. A linguistic echo, even when the tool wasn't there anymore. And interestingly, this lined up with the human teachers scoring these particular essays lower on uniqueness.
Okay, that's one side. What about the other switch? The people who started brain only and then got to use the LLM.
Ah, the brain to LLM group. This was fascinating. When they were allowed to use the LLM, especially on a topic they'd already tackled themselves, their brain connectivity showed a significant increase across all the EEG bands.
Wait, an increase? So after doing the hard work first, using the AI made their brains more active. That seems totally opposite to the other findings.
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance, but it suggests something really important about timing. Introducing the AI tool after someone has already put in significant self-driven effort might actually enhance engagement and neural integration. It could be a more neurocognitively optimal way to use these tools than just relying on them from the start.
So prime the pump yourself first, then bring in the AI.
That seems to be the implication. This group was also better at writing fine-tuned prompts for the LLM, kind of like how the search engine group learned to refine searches because they'd already grappled with the topic and knew what they needed.
So it's a much more nuanced picture. Prior AI use didn't make them totally disengaged. They still put in cognitive effort, but maybe the type of effort shifted more towards evaluating, refining, directing the AI.
Exactly. More like becoming an editor or a curator of the AI's output, rather than just a passive recipient. And the big educational takeaway here seems to support a model where you delay integrating AI tools until learners have really done that initial heavy lifting themselves. It promotes both effective tool use and helps build that lasting cognitive autonomy.
Makes sense. Now, you also mentioned echo chambers and bias. How do these tools play into that?
Well, traditional essay writing ideally encourages you to look at diverse perspectives, right?
Yeah.
But digital tools can sometimes inadvertently undermine that.
How?
What the research suggests is that these LLM-powered conversational search systems might actually amplify the problem of selective exposure, only seeing stuff you already agree with even more than regular search engines.
Really? Why would that be?
Participants in some studies engaged in more biased information searching when using LLMs, especially if the LLM itself seemed to have an opinion. And it might be partly because LLMs are fundamentally next token predictors. They're optimized to give you the most probable output, which often means giving you information that aligns with what you've already indicated you believe or want to see. It's reinforcing.
So it's not necessarily trying to be biased, it's just predicting what fits.
Right. It's predicting based on patterns, which can lead to more consonant, reinforcing information. Plus, the whole back-and-forth conversational style can sometimes narrow your focus even more, making it harder to stumble upon different viewpoints.
And the danger there is?
It compromises critical thinking development. If you're not encountering challenging perspectives, you miss the chance to really grapple with them. You might not even realize what you don't know, leading to, overconfidence based on incomplete information, stuck in your bubble.
Okay, so we've covered the cognitive side pretty thoroughly,
Yeah.
but you mentioned another cost earlier, the environmental one.
Yeah, that's a really important piece of context. We talk a lot about the cognitive cost, the mental shortcuts, but this convenience isn't free in a literal sense either. It has a significant material and environmental footprint.
How significant are we talking?
Well, one data point cited suggests a single LLM query can consume something like 10 times more energy than a typical Google search query.
10 times, wow.
Yeah, when you scale that up globally, it's a huge energy demand.
Yeah.
And that's a hidden cost of convenience that the study suggests consumers will likely start paying for indirectly pretty soon as companies have to cover those massive infrastructure and energy costs.
That's definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And one last point on how information gets shaped. Something about shareholders.
Right. The source also pointed out that ultimately what an LLM ranks as top or most relevant isn't just about the algorithm, it's also influenced by the priorities and goals of the company, the shareholders behind the LLM. Just another layer influencing the information curated for us.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. What's the big picture for someone listening to this?
Well, I think the core tension is clear, right? LLMs offer these undeniable benefits, convenience, speed, productivity gains. We saw that 60% boost. But as this deep dive shows, that might come at a pretty significant cognitive cost. It can impact your critical thinking, your memory recall, your ability to engage in deep learning. Our brains literally adapt to the tools we use, changing how we process and store information.
It really sounds like a double-edged sword.
It does. But there's that hopeful nuance, too. The finding that doing the hard cognitive work first, before bringing in AI, might actually be a neurocognitively better approach. It seems to enhance engagement and neural integration when used strategically. So it's not about completely avoiding AI.
Right, it's about how and when you choose to use it, being intentional.
Exactly, being conscious of the trade-offs.
So maybe the final thought to leave everyone with is this. Given that our brains physically adapt to how we train them, what kind of intellectual future are we, collectively, building as we lean more and more on these incredibly powerful AI tools? And maybe more personally, how can you consciously choose to interact with this technology in a way that genuinely enhances rather than diminishes your own cognitive power and your intellectual independence?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Something definitely worth pondering as you navigate your own information world.